They said the Carver estate only celebrated weddings under a blood-red moon, and by dawn, the bride was never seen again. The year was 1863. The Civil War had already drenched the South in blood, but deep in the woods of Alabama, far from any battlefield, another kind of darkness waited. The Carver family. Old money, old secrets, and a name whispered with fear from town to town. When word spread that Elias Carver, the last heir of the family, was finally getting married, the town of Hollow Creek erupted in gossip. No one had seen the estate in years. No one had been invited in decades. But somehow 50 invitations appeared overnight, each sealed with black wax, each written in ink that shimmered faintly red under candlelight. The letter was simple. You are cordially invited to witness the union of Elias Carver and Miss Annabel Finch on the night of November 3, 1863, at the Carver estate. Attendance is not optional. That last line, attendance is not optional, made even the bravest hesitate. But fear has a strange way of bending to curiosity, and the people of Hollow Creek had always wondered what went on behind those gates. The night of the wedding came. The moon hung low and swollen, red, just like the stories said. Carriages rolled down the narrow dirt road, wheels creaking, horses shivering though the air was still. The forest seemed alive. Branches swayed without wind. Owls watched silently from the treetops. As the guests approached the mansion, they saw it, a sprawling structure of rotting oak and black stone. Every window glowed faintly, but the light flickered as if from 1,000 struggling candles. The iron gates groaned open on their own. No one was there to welcome them. Inside the great hall, portraits lined the walls, paintings of Carver brides, each dressed in white, each with hollow, lifeless eyes. Some portraits looked centuries old, others seemed newer, too new. A hush fell when Elias Carver entered, tall, pale, eyes like storm clouds. He smiled thinly and lifted a glass. "My friends," he said, "tonight the Carver line continues. Let us dine before the ceremony." The guests followed him into a massive dining room. The table stretched nearly 20 feet long. Candles melted into pools of red wax. The air smelt of roasted meat and iron, a strange metallic sweetness that clung to every breath. A maid in black moved silently between guests, pouring wine that shimmered darker than any red they had ever seen. Some whispered it wasn't wine at all, but no one dared refuse. Then came the toasts, each one stranger than the last. "To the bride who will join the Carver name," said an old man. "To the blood that binds us," said another. And finally, Elias raised his glass and smiled. "To tradition." The room fell silent. The word tradition echoed like a curse. Annabel entered then. The bride. A vision of beauty wrapped in silk and fear. Her veil trembled slightly as she walked. Her eyes darted toward the portraits on the wall, and her hand gripped the edge of her dress until her knuckles turned white. Someone whispered, "She doesn't look happy." Another muttered, "No Carver bride ever is." Elias took her hand and led her toward the altar that stood at the far end of the dining hall. It wasn't a church altar, more like an ancient slab of black stone. Candles surrounded it, symbols carved deep into the floor, symbols that looked wrong. The air grew heavy. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to dim. Elias placed his hand on the stone. Annabel hesitated. He whispered something in her ear, words no one could hear, and she froze. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. Then, just as the priest began to speak, the candles flickered out, every single one. For a few seconds, there was nothing but darkness. Then, a sound, a whisper, a low humming chant coming from somewhere beneath the floor. The ground trembled lightly. When the candles reignited, Elias was smiling. Annabelle was gone. The guests gasped, the priest stammered, confused, and the family, every single Carver seated at the table, was grinning. No one moved, no one spoke. Then, Elias turned to the crowd. His voice was calm. "The bride," he said, "has gone to fulfill our family's sacred vow. The night is not yet over." He raised his glass again. "To love that never dies." The guests sat frozen. No one dared ask what that meant. The room felt colder now, as if something unseen was walking among them. Footsteps creaked upstairs. A woman's cry echoed faintly through the walls. And Elias smiled wider. "It is tradition," he repeated. The clock struck midnight. Outside, thunder rolled without rain. Inside, the guests could still hear the crying, faint, desperate, coming from above. And none of them dared to leave, because the Carvers had locked the doors. If you think you could survive one night at the Carver estate, hit like, share, and subscribe for next, The Feast That Shouldn't Have Happened. And tell me in the comments, would you have stayed or run? The candles came back on, but the bride was gone. And everyone at that table knew better than to ask why. The dining hall of the Carver mansion sat in silence. Only the fire dared to move, crackling weakly against the heavy air. Elias Carver stood at the head of the table, eyes fixed on the empty seat where his bride had been moments before. No one spoke. No one breathed too loudly. Then Elias smiled, a cold, perfect smile. "My friends," he said softly, "let us continue the feast. Annabelle has other duties to attend." The way he said it, like it was both a promise and a threat, made a chill crawl through every spine in the room. The servants reappeared as if summoned by the darkness itself, men and women dressed in black, their faces pale, their eyes empty. They moved in silence, carrying trays covered in silver domes. Each dish was laid before the guests without a word. When the lids were lifted, the smell hit first, sweet, metallic, and rotten at the same time. One woman gagged. A man coughed into his napkin, and yet Elias raised his fork and began to eat. No one dared stop him, so they followed. The meat on their plates was unlike anything they'd ever seen, dark, almost purple, tender, but cold. Some pieces still bled faintly as though the animal, if it was an animal, had only just been killed. The wine flowed freely, thicker than before, staining glasses and lips the color of dried blood. At the far end of the table, a guest whispered, "Where's the bride?" The man beside him nudged his arm sharply. "Don't ask," he hissed. "You'll draw attention." But the whisper had already reached Elias. He looked up slowly, his gray eyes catching the candlelight. "Curiosity," he said, his voice smooth, "is a dangerous thing in this house." He tapped his glass with his knife, the sound echoing through the hall. "In the Carver family, we honor silence. We feast when we are told, and we speak only when we invited." No one spoke again. A clock ticked somewhere behind the walls, every second dragged like a blade across glass. Then, from upstairs, a noise. A faint thud. Then another. Then a muffled scream. The guests froze. A woman dropped her fork. Elias didn't flinch. He sipped his wine slowly, his lips curling into a grin. "Do not worry," he said. "The bride is simply learning her vows." The screams didn't stop. They came in bursts, sharp, human, terrified, each one quieter than the last. A man stood, trembling. He said, "Mr. Carver, perhaps we should check on her." Elias slammed his hand on the table. The sound silenced the room like a gunshot. "You will stay," he said, calm again. "It is tradition." The man sat back down, pale as death. A bead of sweat rolled down his cheek. As the feast dragged on, the guests began to notice things they hadn't before. The portraits on the wall. They weren't still. Their eyes seemed to move, following, watching. One woman swore she saw a tear roll down a painted bride's cheek. Another noticed that the portraits weren't just of past brides, but of guests. People who had once attended a Carver wedding and never returned. At the center of the table sat a massive wedding cake, black as tar, decorated with white lilies that looked almost real. A servant stepped forward to cut it, but Elias raised his hand. "No," he said. "The bride must make the first cut." He turned his eyes toward the staircase. For a moment, everyone followed his gaze. The steps were empty. Then they heard it. Footsteps, soft, slow, barefoot. Annabelle appeared. Her wedding dress was torn, her veil gone, her skin pale as chalk, her lips stained red. The guests gasped. One fainted, another began to pray under his breath. Elias rose from his chair, smiling like a man seeing a ghost. "My love," he said, "you are perfect." Annabelle's eyes didn't move. She stared forward, unblinking. When she spoke, her voice was hollow. "I am his." The room went silent. Elias guided her to the cake, placed the knife in her trembling hand. Together, they cut the first slice. Blood poured out. Not red frosting, not jam, real blood. The smell filled the hall. Some guests screamed, others bolted for the doors. But they wouldn't open. The handles burned to the touch, glowing faintly red as if forged in fire. Elias turned slowly towards them, smiling. "It's bad manners to leave before the feast ends." Annabelle stood motionless. A tear slid down her cheek. Her lips moved, whispering something too soft to hear. One of the guests leaned forward. "What did she say?" Another answered, trembling. "She said, 'Help me.'" Before anyone could react, the candles flickered out again. Screams filled the dark, the sound of glass shattering, chairs crashing, people running. Then, silence. When the lights returned, Elias stood alone at the table. The guests were gone. Only empty chairs remained, and 50 new portraits lined the walls. Each one freshly painted. Each face terrified. Elias raised his glass one last time. "To the Carver family," he whispered. "To tradition." If you think the nightmare is over, you're wrong. Next comes the wedding night ritual. Hit like, share, and subscribe if you dare to see what happened after the lights went out. And comment below, what do you think happened to the guests? When the candles went out, 50 guests vanished. And upstairs, behind a locked door, the bride began her wedding night, alone. The storm had started. Rain fell in sheets across the Carver estate, pounding against broken windows and cracked shutters. Lightning crawled over the sky, illuminating the house like a flash of bone. From the outside, the mansion looked abandoned, but inside it was alive, breathing, listening. And somewhere upstairs, Annabelle Finch, now Annabelle Carver, was not alone. The room she woke in was not the bridal suite she'd seen earlier that night. It was smaller, older. The wallpaper peeled like dead skin. The smell of iron and damp earth filled the air. Her wrists ached. She looked down. Chains, rusty and cold, fastened to a bed that looked more like a coffin on legs. Her wedding dress was torn, her fingers stained red, and carved into the headboard above her, deep and uneven, were 5 words. Obedience is the first vow. Annabel tried to scream, but her throat felt dry, scraped raw. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard movement, footsteps, slow, heavy. Then a voice, soft, calm. "Awake, my bride." Elias Carver stepped into the candlelight. His face was pale, almost colorless. His eyes glowed faintly in the flicker. He carried something in his hands, a small silver bowl filled with dark liquid. He set it on the table beside her and smiled. "It is time," he said, "for the Carver vow." Annabel shook her head weakly. "Please," she whispered, "let me go." Elias leaned closer. "Do you know why our family never dies, Annabel?" he asked softly. "Because we remember. Every bride who joins us gives herself fully, her heart, her voice, her blood." He lifted the bowl. Inside it, something moved, thick, alive, beating faintly as though it were a living thing submerged in the dark. Annabel turned her face away, but Elias grabbed her chin and forced her to look. "This," he said, "is the first vow, to drink what is ours, to become one with the Carver line." The walls began to hum, a low, deep vibration that shook the floorboards. Shadows twisted across the ceiling like hands reaching down. From behind Elias, a door creaked open. A dozen figures stepped out. Women in decaying white gowns, faces pale and hollow, their eyes black as tar. Each one held a candle. Each one had a name stitched into her dress. Margaret, Helen, Clara, Charlotte. The Carver brides. Elias turned toward them and raised the bowl. "Witness her vow," he said. The women spoke together, voices layered, echoing like wind through graves. "One drinks, all remember." He turned back to Annabel and held the bowl to her lips. She struggled, tried to turn away, but his grip was iron. The liquid touched her tongue, and the taste was pure rot and blood. Her vision blurred, her body convulsed. She screamed, but it came out wrong, a sound too deep to be human. The candles flared, the room filled with red light, and for a moment she saw them. The past brides, their faces twisted, mouths sewn shut, skin cracked like porcelain. They were not dead, they were kept. Trapped between life and death, bound to the Carver name. Annabel gasped for air. "What do you want from me?" she cried. Elias leaned close, whispering into her ear, "Just your heart." He pressed a hand to her chest, and then he began to speak in a language she didn't know. The walls shuddered, the candles bent inward, their flames sucked toward the center of the room. Annabel's body lifted off the bed, the chains tightening until blood trickled down her wrists. The brides circled her, chanting, their eyes glowing faintly red. "Blood to bind, flesh to feed. One becomes us, we become one." Downstairs in the dining hall, something strange was happening. The portraits were changing. The faces of the missing guests, frozen in terror, faded away, and in their place appeared new faces, smiling, peaceful, as if they had accepted their fate. The grandfather clock struck 1. Thunder boomed overhead, and with it came a scream so piercing it shattered the glass in the windows. The sound echoed through every hall, every corridor, until it bled into silence. When Annabel opened her eyes, she was no longer chained. The room was quiet, empty. Elias was gone. She stood slowly, her legs trembling, her dress hung in tatters. She stumbled toward a mirror on the wall and froze. It wasn't her reflection staring back. It was another woman, a bride, one she'd seen in the portraits, Margaret Carver. Annabel screamed and stepped back, but the reflection smiled. "You belong to us now," it said softly. The mirror rippled like water. A hand reached out from it, cold and pale, wrapping around her wrist. Before she could pull away, she was yanked inside. The mirror stilled. Only her veil remained on the floor. Outside, the storm stopped. The sky cleared, calm as if nothing had happened. Inside the Carver mansion, Elias stood alone in the great hall. He lifted a new portrait, freshly painted, and hung it among the others. It was Annabel, smiling, eyes empty. He stepped back and whispered, "Welcome home, my bride." The candles flickered once more, and the house sighed, satisfied. You've seen the wedding night, but the Carver's curse goes much deeper. Next is next, the secret room behind the chapel. Hit like, share, and subscribe if you dare uncover what's buried beneath the Carver estate. And tell me in the comments, would you break that mirror or join the family? They said the Carver mansion was built on holy ground, but beneath its chapel lay a room that even God had forgotten. The morning after the wedding was too quiet. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of thunder, wet wood and smoke. The townspeople whispered that no one had seen the wedding guests return. Not one carriage had come back down that dirt road. And by noon, Hollow Creek had already started telling stories, that the Carvers had finally done it, that another bride had vanished, that the mansion had claimed more souls. But one man refused to accept the rumors. His name was Thomas Avery, a local preacher who'd performed the ceremony the night before. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, Annabel Carver, pale as death, dragged away in silence. By midday, Thomas saddled his horse and rode back to the Carver estate. The road was empty. The forest felt wrong, too still, too cold. When he reached the gates, they were wide open, swinging slowly in the wind. The mansion loomed like a corpse waiting to be buried. Windows shattered, doors cracked, the smell of decay thick in the air. He called out, "Elias! Annabel!" No answer. Only the echo of his own voice and the faint hum of something deep underground. Inside, the great hall was frozen in time. Candles had melted into crimson puddles, chairs overturned. The long dining table still set for 50 guests, plates untouched, glasses half full. But the portraits were different. Last night they'd shown terrified faces. Now every single one smiled. Even Annabel. Thomas's hands shook as he held his Bible tighter. He muttered a prayer under his breath and kept walking. He followed the sound, that low vibrating hum, like a voice beneath the floorboards. It led him through the hall, past the staircase, to a small wooden door behind the chapel. The door was half hidden under an old tapestry, a tapestry depicting a wedding scene. A bride and groom standing before an altar, but instead of rings, they exchanged hearts. He pulled the tapestry aside. Behind it, the door creaked open on its own. A rush of cold air hit him in the face, and with it, the smell of blood and damp stone. A staircase spiraled downward. He took a candle from the wall and descended, step by step, into the dark. The air grew thicker as he went down. He could hear whispers now, not words, just voices, endless and overlapping. At the bottom, he reached a narrow hall lit by dim lanterns. Symbols were carved into the walls, circles, crosses, eyes, but none he recognized from any scripture. At the end of the hall stood a door of black iron. and carved into it the Carver family crest, a hand holding a bleeding heart. Thomas hesitated. He could feel something breathing on the other side, but faith pushed him forward. He turned the handle. The door opened. The room was vast, cold, silent. At the center stood an altar of stone, stained dark with age. Around it were jars, dozens of them, filled with red liquid that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. And along the walls hung the wedding veils of every Carver bride, some white, some brown with blood. Thomas stepped closer. There were markings on the floor, rings of ash, animal bones, symbols burned into the wood. Then he saw it. In the corner, half covered by a torn sheet, a body. He rushed to it. It was Annabelle. Her skin was pale, her eyes open but glassy. He fell to his knees. "Lord, have mercy," he whispered. But as he reached to close her eyes, she blinked. Thomas stumbled back. Annabelle sat up slowly, her head tilting, as if her neck didn't quite work right. She said, "Father Avery," softly. Her voice was calm, too calm. "You shouldn't be here." He tried to speak, but his words stuck in his throat. "Annabelle, what happened?" She smiled faintly. "He showed me the truth." "Elias?" "No," she whispered. "It." She looked toward the altar. Thomas followed her gaze and froze. There was something there. A shadow, hunched and pulsing like a heartbeat. It had no face, only the outline of a man. Its presence pressed down on him like a weight. The shadow spoke in a voice that wasn't human, a deep, gurgling whisper that filled every corner of the room. "She is one of us now." Thomas raised his cross. "In the name of God," the shadow laughed. "God left this place long ago." The lanterns burst, one by one. The room filled with darkness. Annabelle stood, her eyes glowing faintly red. "Father," she said, "he's waiting for the next vow." Thomas turned to run, but something grabbed his ankle, a hand gray and cold, reaching from the floor. Another hand joined it, then another, until a dozen pale arms clawed their way out of the ground, dragging themselves upward. The Carver brides. Their lips moved in unison. One drinks, all remember. Thomas screamed and pulled free, stumbling toward the stairs. Behind him the shadow rose, filling the room like smoke. He ran, tripping over his robe, scrambling up the steps. The voices followed. The whispering grew louder, faster, until it felt like the air itself was speaking. When he burst through the chapel doors, the sunlight hit his face, and the mansion fell silent. He turned once more before leaving. Through the cracked door, he saw Annabelle standing at the top of the stairs, her face calm, her eyes black. In her hand, she held a single candle. Its flame burned red. She said, "Tell them, the Carvers will never die." Then the doors slammed shut, shaking the earth, and the mansion went dark again. That night, the Carver estate burned. No one knew how it started. Some said lightning struck it. Others said it was Thomas himself. But when the ashes cooled, the basement beneath the chapel was untouched. And from beneath the rubble, a single candle still burned. The Carver story isn't over. What Thomas found beneath that chapel was only the beginning. Next comes the Carver curse. Hit like, share, and subscribe if you dare to uncover the origin of the Carver family's dark pact. And comment below, do you believe curses can survive fire? The fire should have ended it. But evil doesn't burn. It waits and remembers every vow ever made in its name. The Carver mansion was gone, reduced to ash and memory. But beneath the ruins, something still breathed. Something older than the Carvers, older than the land itself. For weeks, the people of Hollow Creek tried to forget. They buried the story, the names, the screams. But at night, smoke still rose from the blackened hill, and every full moon, the air carried a strange sound, like a woman whispering, "One drinks, all remember." Father Thomas Avery didn't sleep for days. The fire had taken half his hair, burned his hands, and scarred his soul. But worse than the wounds were the dreams. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Annabelle, standing in the chapel, holding that red candle, her voice echoing through fire and bone. "Tell them the Carvers will never die." And in his dreams, he saw more, a place before the mansion, before the family, before the curse began. The year was 1791, long before Elias Carver, before Alabama was even a state. The first Carver, Jonathan Carver, was a soldier turned farmer, a hard man, cruel to everyone but himself. He built the mansion on land stolen from a tribe that had once worshipped the woods around Hollow Creek. They warned him not to dig too deep, not to disturb the stones buried in the earth. But Jonathan didn't listen. He wanted wealth. He wanted power. He wanted to be remembered. And one night, when the crops failed and famine spread, he went into the forest to pray, not to God, but to whatever listened in the dark. They say he found an altar, covered in moss and bones, and on it lay a book, its pages black, its letters carved in something that looked like flesh. Jonathan took it home, and that same night he read aloud from its pages. His wife said the house shook, the air turned red, and something crawled up from beneath the floorboards, something that smiled without a face. By morning, Jonathan was rich. The fields had grown overnight. His wife was pregnant, and he built a chapel on the hill to honor the gift. But every gift has a price. When his wife gave birth, the baby didn't cry. Its skin was pale, its eyes black, and it whispered something no human tongue should know. Jonathan screamed, tried to burn the book, but it wouldn't catch fire. It only bled. That night, his wife vanished. The next morning, a new painting hung on the wall. A woman in white, smiling, eyes hollow. And the legend began. Every generation after Jonathan made the same vow. To keep the family alive, a bride must be offered. Not killed, given, bound to the thing that lived beneath the chapel. And for over 70 years, the Carvers obeyed. Each new heir sealed the deal in blood. Each new bride kept the darkness fed. Until Elias. Elias Carver was different. He wasn't born like the others. He was made. Town records showed no birth certificate, no mother's name. Some said he'd been found in the woods after a storm, wrapped in a blood-stained veil. The curse had taken human form. And when he grew, the whispers followed him. Animals died when he passed. Mirrors cracked when he smiled. And he built the wedding tradition to keep himself alive, to feed the curse that kept his heart beating. Father Thomas discovered all of this in the church archives. Hidden journals, letters, even a lock of Annabelle's hair sealed in wax. The writing spoke of the blood of the bride, a ritual that bound love and death together, ensuring eternal life for the Carver line. But one letter stood out, written by Elias himself. When the vows end, the house will fall. When the house burns, the fire will call. But even ash remembers blood, and blood always rebuilds. Thomas realized the fire hadn't destroyed the curse. It had freed it. That night he returned to the ruins. The earth was still warm, smoke still curling from the black soil. He stood before the remains of the chapel and began to pray. "Lord, if you hear me," he whispered, "take what's left of them. Take it away." The ground trembled. A whisper rose from below. "One drinks. All remember." The ashes began to move. Slowly at first, then violently. They swirled in the air, forming shapes, faces, hands, veils. Dozens of them. The Carver brides. Thomas fell to his knees. He clutched his cross, shouting scripture until his voice cracked. The wind roared, and then, just as suddenly, silence. When he opened his eyes, the ruins were gone. The land was clean, empty, peaceful. For the first time in months, he thought the nightmare had ended. But miles away, in the nearby town of Rose Hill, a young couple was getting married. They'd bought an old patch of land for cheap, said it was perfect for their new farmhouse. The man's name was Matthew Carver, a descendant no one knew existed. And on the morning of his wedding, a letter arrived, sealed in black wax, the same words written in blood-red ink. "You are cordially invited to witness the union of Matthew Carver and Miss Eliza Hale. Attendance is not optional." That night, thunder rolled over Rose Hill. The guests arrived, confused but curious. The moon turned red, and from the newly built house came the sound of distant laughter. Inside, on the mantel, a single painting hung. Annabel Carver, smiling. The curse was never broken. It only changed names. Next comes The Morning After. Hit like, share, and subscribe if you dare to see what the next generation of Carvers awoke to. And comment below. Would you open that invitation? When the sun rose over Rose Hill, it didn't rise alone. It brought whispers. It brought blood. And it brought back the Carvers. Morning came quietly. Too quietly. No birds, no wind, just the faint sound of something creaking from inside the new Carver house. A mailman named Walter Briggs was the first to arrive. He'd been delivering letters through those back roads for 20 years. He knew every family, every porch, every barking dog. But that morning, there was no barking. No smoke from chimneys, just the Carver house. Newly painted, white as bone, sitting alone in the mist. The letter in his hand was strange. No address, no return name. Just a symbol, a circle of blood, with a single eye inside. Walter knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Then he heard it. A faint sound from inside the walls. Something like breathing. He pushed open the door. The smell hit him first, roses and iron. And then he saw the wedding table. Plates half-eaten, glasses tipped over, candles melted into rivers of wax. But no people. Only chairs pulled out, as if every guest had stood up at once and never sat down again. Walter called out, "Hello, Mr. Carver?" No reply. Just that faint sound again. Breathing. From upstairs. He climbed slowly, the steps groaning under his weight, and when he reached the top, he saw a door slightly open. Light flickered behind it. Candlelight. He pushed it wider. Inside, the bride's dress lay on the bed, empty, torn, soaked in red. and written on the mirror in something thick and dark were 6 words. One drinks, all remember, all return. Walter stumbled back. He ran down the stairs, heart pounding, and burst out into the yard. But the road was gone. In its place, a field of fog. And somewhere beyond it, the faint sound of laughter. Children's laughter. He turned toward the house one last time, and through the upstairs window, he saw her. A woman in a wedding gown. Face pale, eyes black, smiling down at him. Then the window cracked, and her voice whispered through the air. You came uninvited. By the next morning, the mail cart was found in a ditch a mile away. No sign of Walter, no letters, no tracks. But the sheriff found something strange in the mud. A single golden ring, with the name Annabelle engraved inside. Over the next few weeks, Rose Hill began to change. People heard music at night, the same waltz that had played at the Carver weddings. Lanterns would light themselves along the dirt road leading to the new house, and every few nights someone would vanish. A guest, a traveler, a child chasing fireflies. When search parties went into the woods, they'd find circles carved into the trees, each one marked with that same bleeding eye. And always nearby, white roses. Fresh, fragrant, planted in perfect rows. Then came the storm, a week after the last disappearance. Lightning split the sky, the earth shook, and the house, the new Carver house, burned. But this time, it didn't fall. The fire never reached the roof, the walls didn't crack. The flames stayed alive for 3 full nights, never consuming, never dying. Locals said it was feeding. And when it finally went dark, the land was cold again. Still, but wrong. Years passed. People forgot. The land was sold, rebuilt. A school was opened there in the 1920s, a church in the 1950s, a small neighborhood in the 2000s. And through every generation, one thing never changed. A wedding. Always on the same night in May. Always ending with a missing bride. The papers called it a coincidence. A curse, others said. But the locals, they just called it Carver Day. Every year, candles appear at the edge of town. No one claims them. And when the wind blows, people swear they can hear the sound of glasses clinking, of guests toasting to something no one can see. Last year, a historian named Dr. Rebecca Lane began researching the Carvers for a book. She found Father Thomas Avery's journals hidden in a church basement. She read every word, every horror, every warning. Her final entry, dated just 2 months ago, said this: I've traced the Carver bloodline. It never ended. It changed its name. The last surviving heir lives right here in Rose Hill. His name is Matthew Lane, my husband. Rebecca hasn't been seen since that entry. Her house is empty, her notes gone, but every light in her street flickers at midnight. And if you listen closely, you can hear faint music, a violin playing a wedding march over and over again. And sometimes, if the night is still enough, you'll see them walking past the windows, brides in white, eyes black, veils torn, smiling. The curse never ended. It simply found new blood to wear. because the Carver family's promise still echoes through time. Till death do us part, and after. If you made it this far, you've just witnessed one of America's most cursed love stories. Do you believe the Carver curse still lives on? Comment your theory below. I'll pin the most chilling one. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying true legends, because the next story might be waiting in your own town.